It's August 23rd, 2021. This is Roqe. Hi there, welcome to episode 138 of Roqe. Hope you're keeping well wherever you are tuning in from around the world. Durud, salam, dostan aziz. Omidvar hastam ke khub va mizun bashin. Hello to you from Toronto, Canada. Welcome to another one of our special themed episodes of Roqe this month. Hello, Groovy Shaya. Hello, Azizam. Today, we are focusing on the directors. So 3 remarkable humans of Iranian descent, all of them talented creators who've made and are making a huge contribution in the realm of film. First up, one of the foremost figures in Iranian cinema as a director, screenwriter, and producer over the last 6 decades, Bahman Farmanara, joins us from Tehran. Then the exceptional and award-winning Kurdish writer and filmmaker Bahman Ghobadi is with us from Greece. And finally, the celebrated Iranian-Canadian director and screenwriter Babak Payami joins us in the Roqe studio here in Toronto. That's all coming up. We are coming to you on roqemedia.com. It is there that you can link to all of our platforms and programs and where you can become a patron of this program. We are on our ongoing mission to build a new audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity. We're on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and CastBox. And if you'd like to see some visuals with Roqe, see us on social media, switch over to YouTube or Instagram right now. And if you like your Roqe descriptions and bulletins in English and Farsi, check us out on Telegram. All right, let's get to our guests. We get back to our regular show on September 2nd. But in the meantime, this is another special themed episode of Roqe. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. This is The Directors. Right, here we go. You know, it's no secret that Iranian cinema has a dynamic tradition and has been lauded all over the world for its poetry, poignance, and allegorical storytelling. Well, there are few names over the last half century that have had a bigger contribution to Iranian filmmaking than our first guest. Bahman Farmanara is a globally acclaimed film director, screenwriter, and producer born in Tehran. His first role as a director came with The House of Qamar Khanum back in 1972, before writing, directing, and producing Prince Ehtijab in 1974, which won the Grand Prix at the International Tehran Film Festival. He then produced some major films, including Abbas Kiarostami's first feature, Bahram Beyzai's The Crow, and Khosrow Haritash's Divine One. Bahman Farmanara moved to France and then to Canada in 1980 when his film The Tall Shadows of the Wind was banned in Iran, and he then established a distribution company and a film festival for children and young adults in Vancouver. His prolific career then focused in North America, where he helped films such as Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ and Stephen Frears' The Grifters make it to the big screen. He returned to Iran and from 1991 endured a 10-year ban from filmmaking in Iran. Bahman Farmanara's break into a global audience, you might say, was with the movie The Smell of Camphor, Fragrance of Jasmine in the year 2000, which won 8 awards at the International Fajr Film Festival, including the Best Film and the Best Director. It also won the Special Jury Prize at the Montreal Film Festival. He's since made 5 more compelling films that have been internationally recognized, including his latest, Tale of the Sea. He is undoubtedly one of the foremost figures in Iranian cinema, and right now, Bahman Farmanara joins me from Tehran. Hello, sir.
Hi. Good to hear from you.
It's so nice to talk to you again, and I want to be clear on what I should call you. I'm tempted to call you Aghay Farmanara, but how do you feel? What should I call you?
No, my first name is better because when they call me Aghay Farmanara, I sound too old.
Okay, well, you're definitely not too old, so I'll do that. Let me ask you this first, Bahman. It may seem curious to an outsider who doesn't know you well that you have chosen to stay in Tehran, in Iran for that matter. You're not unfamiliar with the West. You studied in California, you lived in Vancouver, you ran major film companies in North America. Much of your family is in Canada and the US. On this show, we've talked to a few different well-known artists who are in the diaspora, Iranian artists who love their Iranian heritage, but do not feel like they could do the kind of work that they want to do in Iran. But you have chosen to go back there and stay. Can you tell us why?
Well, the reality of it is that I want to be in Iran. I'm making films for the Iranian audience. I don't say that if, for example, a French critic likes my movie, I'll be unhappy. No, but that's like cream on the cake. My cake is Iranian people, and I like to communicate with them, and especially when there are some upheavals, as it was in the last year, and people got killed and so on. I really want to be in this country when it's in turmoil because I feel very guilty to be outside of Iran, enjoying myself, and other things are happening here. So that's why I've come back, and I like to stay in Iran. And really, unless there is a major purpose for it, I don't want to leave Iran at this time.
I want to get into your storied career. When people talk about you, historians, critics, fans, they talk about your career being split into two. The films you made or were involved in pre-revolution, and then the films you've done and the outspoken stands you've taken after the revolution. Do you see your own life that way?
I've never been a filmmaker just for the fun of it or try to make a um, major film that sells a lot and all that. I have a mission as far as I'm concerned. Before the revolution, Prince Ertejab, that I made, is a film that is clearly opposite to a monarchy way and ruling in Iran. They're not all political, but I see and I criticize the government in charge. And since the Islamic Revolution, nothing is to my satisfaction as far as the freedom of us, the artists. We are heavily censored in every aspect of the work. I'm not talking about only movies, I'm talking about the writers, poets, painters, uh, everybody that is in art. And gradually, in the last 42 years, major artists have died. And in these 42 years, Islamic Republic has totally failed to replace at least one of these people, important people that we've lost, and say, okay, that is the future, and he's going to replace so and so.
You talk about you and other artists being heavily censored. And one of the through lines of your prolific career on all sides of film, as a writer, director, producer, actor, has been dealing with censorship, both before the revolution and definitely after. And I want to ask you about this for people to get some sense of what you've had to deal with over the years. In 1979, your film Tall Shadows of the Wind, from what I understand, authorities viewed this film's dream sequence carefully several times, even frame by frame, to count the number of scarecrows to ensure that there were not 12 of them, because it would have translated to sacrilege by making reference to the 12 imams. The film was banned by the Forbidden Acts Bureau in Iran. You were accused of making anti-Islamic films. You were banned from exiting Iran for a period of time. What were the mechanics of this? In other words, were the members of the review committee known to the filmmakers? Were they themselves engaged in the filmmaking profession? Were they film critics? Who gets to decide?
Well, that's a $60,000 question because we almost anybody can decide, regardless of their position. And there is not as yes, we have a Ministry of Culture and Islamic guidance, but so many times they are influenced by the pressure groups from all around Iran. So we never know who has decided this. When I did Tall Shadows of the Wind, after 3 days, they took the film off, and they asked me to go to an institution which it is called Prevention of Sin institution. And I went there at 9 a.m. and I was there till 9 p.m. There was a young mullah that was questioning me, and he said that we have 14 innocents, which is the 12 imams and Muhammad, and also the daughter of Muhammad. So he tells me that you burned 14 scarecrows, and by that you mean that you're burning the 14 innocents in Islamic religion. Well, I remember that I had made 30 scarecrows because it was a very, very long passage that we had to follow. But I figured that maybe, in that shot that we used, because we never thought about that, maybe there are 14. So I said, no, there were 30, and we looked at that shot, set it up, and the mullah came in and looked at it, and we counted the scarecrows from the beginning of the shot, and luckily there were 16. And his response to me was that I think you added two scarecrows before I arrived,
Wow.
which showed that he didn't know anything about the movies. I don't have two scarecrows in my pocket. And but then he started saying that all your films have been against religion, which I challenged him. I mean, why are you saying this? That is not true. And he referred to a sequence in Prince Job, and the expression that he used was that you have parallel cut two scenes together, a morning sequence and a masturbation sequence together. Well, parallel cut for the guy that thought I had two scarecrows in my pocket, it was not his expression because he didn't know anything about movies. So I felt threatened because I realized one of our esteemed colleagues who was working with them. And I argued, and eventually it took 12 hours till they let me go home. Luckily, I had a visa to go to France because it was close to Cannes Film Festival. And 2 days later, I left. And my wife and three kids came a week later. You never know in Iran.
There's such conflicting feelings listening to stories like this. It's this ongoing paradox where I'm listening to your story about the guy with the saying, no, there was 16 scarecrows and this is what they mean. And it's comical. It's almost like you've written a satire about this story, but it's real and it's devastating at the same time. And I wonder what the impact of all this censorship is on the creators. Like when you have to be that aware of state censorship and when people are literally born into it at this point, it has to become part of the way in which you create. In other words, while Iranians, and certainly you, are people with a lot to say, how prevalent does self-censorship become? How much do you censor yourself in the moment of creation or development of a film because you're always thinking, is this going to get accepted or not?
Well, most of our stories are allegorical uh, simply because you can't directly criticize anybody. But one thing that we have figured out is that I write some really provocative scenes in the script for them to be deleted, so they let the rest of the script, to be shot. And that may sound funny, But it becomes funny when a very obvious shot does not get censored. Although I have put it there to be censored, so they wouldn't touch the rest of the script.
Can you give an example of
Uh,
that?
in the film A Little Kiss, we go in front of the Cyrus's tomb. There is a sequence there, and one of the main characters says, "Our young people, they don't know anything about Cyrus," and the other character says, "Well, it's better because they say that he was an American spy." And he says, "No, no, no. Um, you're wrong. The latest thing that he was a Freemason."
Hmm.
Well, the fact that we're saying that at the time of Cyrus was American spy and America didn't even exist at the
Right, right,
time,
right.
I thought they would definitely would cut it out, but they didn't, and it still is in the film. So sometimes these things happen, and I one thing which I have always mentioned: the people that sit on the censorship board anywhere in the world, I think they are not very bright people. Otherwise, they wouldn't accept this job
Hmm.
because it's a demeaning job. That you think that you're smarter than the rest of the 80 million Iranians, you're smarter. So I'm not surprised sometimes when they miss it, but sometimes they also come to uh, things that you never ever thought that they would say this is what is wrong and you have to take out, because I don't think like them. Sometimes I think I'm more clever than they are, but no, I mean it's a battle.
But you're also undaunted. I mean, you keep going. Your films are incredibly compelling, but they're also quite bleak and full of despair. But I don't think you can be, because despite all we've discussed in terms of censorship, you still search for ways to make films, and you succeed at it. So you have some kind of hope and inspiration to keep making films. What is that in the face of the struggle that you seem to the brick wall you keep hitting up against?
Well, number one is this is my job. It's true I can do other work, but I only enjoy filmmaking. And I try to make films to have a conversation with the nation that I live with. But yes, of course, I tell the young people when they get upset, I said the best gift you can give to the government if you get so depressed that you go and sit in your home and they say, good, we got rid of this guy. So I refuse
Hmm.
to be so depressed that I give up my work and I go and fight every day with another script and try to talk and make another film because giving up is not my job. I'm not a person for giving up.
There's so much to talk about with someone who's had as prolific a career as you have. But I thought for the purposes of our conversation today, I would also focus a little on mortality, if you'll excuse the somewhat macabre direction of doing so, because it seems like we're surrounded by reminders of our mortality these days, or as Ramin Jahanbegloo said here, coming to terms with our own fragility. And it's no secret that you've been returning to themes of death and mortality in your work over the decades. Do you see this time, a global pandemic, as a moment when we're all coming to terms with our own death in somehow a more profound way, like a global teachable moment?
I think one of the three of my films, the critics have put it a trilogy of death. But my comment to them or anybody that has seen the films, I said, you have to be aware that this is a one way ticket. Our lives end sooner or later. But when you're aware that the death is coming, I think you live better. The moments are precious. If I can get hold of my granddaughter who's 3 years old, and I can play with them. I really enjoy it, but this doesn't mean that I forget that, okay, I'm also 80 years old. And I try to use the mortality, which almost everybody thinking person knows that this is going to come an end. Just because tell them that live, fight, make something that you like,
Mm.
enjoy what you have, enjoy your life.
Have you ever been afraid of death?
It hasn't come to me yet.
Mhm.
I don't know. No, why? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's not that I'm going to volunteer for it. No, but I also I know the fragility of our lives, what can happen, and so on. No, I'm not afraid of it, and all I want to, as far as I'm concerned, that my kids are okay, my grandchildren are okay, and there's always a time to say goodbye.
What happens to us when we die?
Nothing. I don't believe in heaven or hell. Both of them are here. We experience them in this life. We just live and die.
You know, you and I were having a conversation, and I remember you said, our religion glorifies death. And that was certainly one of the
Yeah.
precipitants for you to want to explore mortality. But then I was thinking about this today, and I was thinking many Iranians, especially in the diaspora, are not particularly religious. Nevertheless, do you think that that backdrop of glorifying death in the religion that many of us do spawn from, whether we're religious or not now, affects those of us who are more secular?
Well, when you live in Iran, for example, in Tehran, um, all around the city, there are murals of paintings of martyrs. So you're going to work, but in every street that you turn, somehow a martyr is looking down on you on the road that you're going. This continuous background of death and glorifying it, which is an Islamic thing that you go to heaven and so on if you become a martyr, uh, I find it bothersome because um, I'm happy and I understand. I sympathize with the family of the martyrs and so on. But the fact that the whole atmosphere that you are living in on a daily life, you're constantly reminded. I think they don't let you forget it. And that's part of the politics of this particular regime.
You know, you said earlier in this interview, giving up is not my job. And I think about you, and I think sometimes a filmmaker's actions can become more important than his films. You've always been a person, it seems, who stood up against oppression or oppressive governments of different stripes. And in 2009, during those widespread protests following the disputed presidential election in Iran, you wrote that famously you wrote that open letter of protest saying how could anyone remain silent, you said, when so much was happening in your country. Bahman, what are the consequences of such courageous acts? How are you able to stay active in the landscape of the Iranian cinema? You seem fearless to speak out. Are you?
No, I'm not fearless and I'm not an idiot. I know the dictatorship that we have at the police state that we have. But there are two things that maybe sometimes it helps me. I never sign a protest letter with 100 other people. I always write, what I want to say personally, and I would never have a bunch of people around me to encourage me because that's what the government worries about, that you start a movement. But when I write something, I say I have the courage to say it directly, and what happens, happens. Don't know whether you know or not, but My brother-in-law, who was a physician, was executed at the time of the Shah. And he's now very much revered by the Islamic Republic. But most people don't know that he's my brother-in-law because I loved him. I didn't want to use his name for my own advantage. But I think these things happen whenever you have a dictatorship. And before the revolution, we had a dictatorship, and some people really were hurt. And now we have it worse than what we had before because religion also has got involved. When you're saying that this president is an idiot, you're not talking only about your president. You're talking about the government, which is connected to God, to Islam, and so on. So you can be barbecued for it. And because of that, is far worse than what we had at the time of the Shah.
You know, in the darkest days, whether it be in the last 20 years, 40 years, before the revolution even, Iranian cinema has emerged as something that Iranians all over the world can take a lot of pride in, and that's because of people like you, because of people like Abbas Kiarostami, because of people like Jafar Panahi, Asghar Farhadi. How do you see the mood and energy of Iranian cinema now in 2020, after the economic crisis, after the sanctions, after the COVID-19 pandemic? How are the Iranian filmmakers of today looking at the future of cinema and filmmaking? How do you feel about it?
You know, what has happened in Iran is that because government is very touchy with anything that is socially um, critical and all that, we have gone towards, or our cinema has gone towards very, very crass comedies. And you can't even sit down and watch them, for the 80 minutes or 100 minutes or so on. They're so bad. But on the side of it, there is still so much talent in the country. Farhadi belongs to this country. Mohammad Rasulov,
Yes.
he is also lives in this country. So the country is very talented, and the filmmakers are going to make their films. And these really disgusting and ugly films that are being made just for a comedy that government allows them. I think we have reached a point that the bad films are really far more than the really good films. But I'm hopeful because there are so many young, talented people that are coming up every day.
It's such a great pleasure to talk to you. I've kept you so long. I do appreciate this. I have one last question, which is that it occurs to me, you know, we've established you're not old. You're a young man. I'm calling you by your first name. That's how we started, you know. But you have put in an incredible career over many decades. You know, you could choose to take it a little easier. I understand you're still putting in 12-hour days, even during a pandemic, even in your late 70s. Why is it so important now for you to work so much?
Well, Jian, when you get to my age, you are so close to that everlasting rest. I don't want to rest now that I can breathe and I can walk and I can work. I'm useless when I'm on vacation. I'm bored when I'm on vacation because my work is my vacation. When I'm working, I'm okay. I'm a good guy. When I'm not working, I'm grumpy.
Thank you so much for doing this today. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
Khodafis.
Khodafez. Bye.
That is acclaimed filmmaker, director, producer, actor, Bahman Farmanara. He joined us from Tehran. listening to another special themed edition of Roqe, this one called The Directors. Remember, for all things Roqe, you can go to our website, roqemedia.com, for previous episodes, a list of all of our guests, little outtakes, clips, video, etc. roqemedia.com, where you can also become a patron. Our next guest on this Roqe-themed special is truly an exceptional film director, a producer, and writer. Indeed, he is a celebrated creative force and the most prominent Kurdish artist in the world today. Bahman Ghobadi was born in Bahman in the Kurdistan province of Iran. After a brief career in industrial photography, making a dozen award-winning short movies and being an assistant director to Abbas Kiarostami, Bahman Ghobadi made his first feature film in the year 2000 with A Time for Drunken Horses. It is a remarkable film and was an outstanding debut that ended up winning the Camera d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. His second feature, Marooned in Iraq, in 2002, brought him the gold plaque from the Chicago International Film Festival. His third, Turtles Can Fly, followed in 2004, winning the Glass Bear and Peace Film Award at the Berlin International Film Festival and the Golden Shell at the San Sebastian International Film Festival. He also received an Index Film Award in 2006 for making a significant contribution to freedom of expression with Turtles Can Fly. In the same year, his Half Moon, starring renowned actors Golshifteh Farahani, Hassanpur Shirazi, and Hediye Tehrani, won the Golden Shell at the San Sebastian International Film Festival. The music of that movie was made by master Hossein Alizadeh. In May 2009, Bahman's No One Cares About Persian Cats won a special jury prize when it premiered at Cannes. And in 2012, he made Rhino Season, starring Behruz Vusiqi and Monica Bellucci, which was presented by Martin Scorsese. More recently, in 2015, Bahman released the very moving documentary A Flag Without a Country, once again with the Kurdish people as his subject matter. And while Bahman has been working on a number of projects in the last few years, it is his decision to step away from his previous pace of making films and focus on ways of helping Kurdish youth and peoples on the ground that has become more interesting than his cinematic output to a certain extent. It is a great pleasure to have the great Bahman Ghobadi joining us from Greece. Hello, sir.
Hi, Jian. Hello, brother. Thank you so much for your words.
You know, it's a great honor for me to do this. Merci که اومدی و به شما گفتم که we can do this. I'll ask the questions. من سوالا رو میپرسم in English, but you do whatever you feel most comfortable with. If you can answer in English, great. If not, فارسی هم عالیه. No problem, okay?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jian.
Bahman, I don't know where to start with you. I mean, you know that I'm a huge fan of your work, and that I believe A Time for Drunken Horses to be a landmark work that should be mandatory viewing for anyone interested in the Middle East, in Iran, and certainly in the Kurdish people. It was 20 years ago that film came out and brought you to global attention. You've said that you really don't like being a celebrity or winning awards. Do you look back at that film as a gift that gave you so much in your life, or was it difficult for you to be catapulted to so much fame at the age of 31?
Okay. اون وقتی که این فیلمو شوت کردم اصلا واقعا چیزی به نام کن فیلم فستیوال تو ذهنم نبود. من خیلی مثل درانکن هورس، من درانک بودم، یعنی سرخوش بودم از اتفاقی که داشت میافتاد. یه دوربین پیدا کرده بودم با مامان و خواهر و برادر و پسر خاله هام و فامیلی رفتیم توی روستا با 2-3 تا از دوستام که هممون اولین بار بود. یعنی کامرامن من اولین بار بود که پشت کامرا میرفت و برای من اولین بار بود داشتم میرفتم اونجا و اون جایی که فیلم میساختم من رفتم یه روستایی بودم زمان جنگ کومله و دموکرات کردها با رژیم جمهوری اسلامی ایران. من اونجا 1 سال آواره بودم و اون روزها رو رفتم دوباره خاطراتم رو زنده کنم. بعد دیدم که اونجا یه داستان دیگه است، اصلا انگار جغرافی ایران نیست، یعنی عراقی بودن و رفتم گفتم شما ایرانی هستی؟ گفت ما روزای الکشن ایرانی هستیم در 365 روز یه روز ایرانی هستیم، 364 روزش ما عراقی هستیم و دیدم یه دنیای اونجاست و اینا. و وقتی هم که رفتم خیلی سخت بود ولی اصلا نمیفهمیدم، ولی تمام این سختی ها برام زیبایی آورد. یک لحظه بعد به یاد نمیارم. حتی during the shooting من ایدیا نداشتم. من سکریپتم فکر کنم یه چیز واقعا اینقدر پیج بود، به دیوار زده بودم و ما توی طویله زندگی میکردیم، جایی که حیوونا زندگی میکردن، چون روستا خونه نداشت، درستش کرده بودیم همه با هم یه جا زندگی میکردیم. تجربه غریبی بود، هیچ وقت تکرار نشد و آرزوم اینه دوباره برگردم اونجا. بهترین ملودی های زندگیم رو تو روزا شنیدم. خروپف بچه هایی که اونجا میخوابیدن تو زمستون برای من بست ملودی بود تو دنیا، دیگه تکرار نشد. و زوزه های گرگ و بادی که از شیشه های شکسته که با پلاستیک پوشنده بودیم، اون صدا هیچ وقت دیگه تکرار نشد و این میست و من دلتنگشم. و اینقدر سخت بود ولی تو سختی ما به کشف میرسیدیم. مثلا سایه میخواستم، کلودی ویدر میخواستم، ولی آفتاب بود و من پولم داشت میرفت و پول غذا نداشتیم، نمی‌دونستم این بچه ها رو دوباره یه روز دیگه به اینا پی کنم برای عوامل فیلمم، کامرمن و بچه ها و اینا. و یه دفعه میشستم گفتم خدایا من چرا اینقدر اذیت میشم و اینا. یهو یه آقایی رو، یه بچه به من گفت که تو چرا سدی، چرا ناراحتی؟ گفتم پولم داره تموم میشه. گفت اون آقا هست توی کافی شاپ نشسته، گفت اون خیلی پول داره. گفتم جدی؟ گفتم میتونه کمک کنه. گفت شاید، باش حرف بزن، 4 تا هورس داره. و رفتم اونجا گفتم شما دستتون شکسته چجوری داری بیزنس میکنی؟ گفت من به هورسام الکل میدم، درانک میرن با بقیه و درانک برمیگردن. گفتم I got the idea. So I was in the middle of the shooting and I got this brilliant idea. So در سختی یه چیز روشن اومد توی زندگیم که الان آغوشمو بیشتر دوست دارم برای سختی ها باز کنم.
After A Time for Drunken Horses comes out then, and I actually remember when that came out 20 years ago. I remember seeing it going, oh my God, in Kidoskade, what is this? Who's made? You go through a period of about 10 years where you're releasing, one film a year almost for 10 years. When you look back at that now, that period, Maslam, from 2000 until 2000, let's say Rhino season, 2012, is it a fond period, or did you feel the pressure then to keep having to make films after you did A Drunken Horses and to keep beating your own self?
ببین، مثل بچهای A Time for Drunken Horses بودم. مثلا وقتی که این بچه ها رو نگاه میکنیم که چقدر سختی میکشن، ولی وقتی که با اونا زندگی میکنی it's not سختی دیگه توش نیست. مثلا بچه های فیلم Turtles Can Fly به من میگفتن تو رو خدا فیلم چرا زود تموم میشه، ما بیشتر میخوایم بازی کنیم، ولی خیلی سخت بود. حتی A Time for Drunken Horses بچه ها ناراحت بودن که فیلم تموم بشه، ما دیگه شده بودیم یه فامیل و دوست نداشتیم جدا بشیم. اون موقع سخت بود ولی من سختی رو نمیفهمیدم. مثل همون هورسی بودم که بار سنگین داشتم ولی سرخوش کمک به مادر، کمک به خانواده، و کم کم سینما شد یک گان برای من نمیدونستم سینما یک گانه. یکی از دکومنتری شورت فیلمم لایف این فولک، این خیلی اینترنشنال شد و اون موقع فهمیدم سینما ایز گان و به این دلیل رفتم A Time for Drunken Horses رو بسازم.
یعنی چرا گان؟ Why that metaphor? Why a gun?
این کلمه مبارزه از دو چیز میاد که الان برای تعریف میکنم. من خب همیشه با کردا میجنگم، میگم مبارزه فقط اسلحه نیست، میشه با دوربین جنگی. ما میتونیم در مورد خودمون حرف بزنیم، اسلحه رو بذاریم کنار. همیشه بعد وقتی که پشت کامera هستم همیشه یاد دایی میافتم، اون اینجوری بود، منم همین کامera، فیگور یک کامرمن عین یک شوتره، کسی که میخواد شوت کنه. و یادم سر A Time for Drunken Horses اولین شاتی که از بچه هندیکاپ گرفتیم، این اومد ترسید، دید یه بوم میکروفون بالا سرشه، یه عده آدمای همش میگفتن به ما مهندس. کامرمن بود، گفتم اوکی everybody ready، بعد گفتم ساوند، گفت ساوند رپ، کامرا اکشن، گفتم اکشن، این فکر از کامera یه چیزی شوت میشه و همیشه فکر میکردم دوربین یک گانه واقعا، و گانی که توش ولی عشق میاد بیرون، توش محبت میاد بیرون. و جواب سوالتو بدم، من سختی رو اصلا نمیفهمم دیگه. اگه من دوباره برگردم به گذشتم، اگه یه فرصتی باشه به دنیا آمدن، دوباره میگم منو برگردون اونجا دوباره همون پدر، همون سختی ها، همون نونوایی. 8 سال جنگم، معنی جنگش نه، سختی ها یعنی behind the war. 8 سال چجوری با هم زندگی کردیم، استرس از این که نفت داریم یا نه. یه پیک داشتیم، یعنی اینا باید به شما بگم. من 13 سال از عمرم توی صف نونوایی بودم. از ساعت 4 صبح میرفتم صف نونوایی تا تقریبا 1-2 بعد از ظهر و همش بیشتر وقتا برق میرفت یا آرد نونوایی تموم میشد. به خاطر که نکن تموم شد میشه 2 تا نونوایی میگرفتم و من هر 5 دقیقه از این محله به اون محله میرفتم. یعنی شاید بگم 500 بار میدویدم و این انرژی اومد توی فیلم ها. یعنی که برگردم میگم همینو میخوام، من همین سلاپینگ رو میخوام، دوست دارم. بخاطر اگه عمر 200 ساله داشته باشم شاید بگم نه، ولی اگه عمر قراره همین 50 60 70 سال 80 سال باشه، من این پرشر رو دوست دارم، من این سختی رو دوست دارم.
ولی the reason I asked the question about those 10 years. I wouldn't ask the question if things hadn't changed, but things have clearly changed for you. You don't have the same output in the last few years, and I know that you've been involved in doing other things. So if we look at that time from Drunken Horses to Rhino Season as this prolific time of output for you, film, what changed in the last few years?
غربت خیلی اذیت کرد، دور شدن از زبان مادری، چون من فیلم سازم و ای کاش من یک شاعر بودم، یک رایتر بودم یا یک نقاش بودم. میتونستم تنها شعر بنویسم، تنها کتاب بنویسم، تنها نقاشی کنم. ولی وقتی که فیلممیکر هستی تو یک تیم میخوای، یک منیجر میخوای، یک ایجنت میخوای، یک پرودوسر میخوای. من تمام 12 سال گذشتم در زدم به خاطر پیدا کردن بودجه و توی ایران میساختم با لو باجت. وقتی که بیرون میای دیگه چیزی به نام لو باجت رو نداریم. مثلا اربیل گرونترین سینمای مدلیست اربیله، یعنی همه چیز خیلی بالاست و اونجا خودم رو پیدا نکردم. از اونجا خسته شدم به خاطر خیلی چیزا که در یه برنامه با شما در موردش حرف میزنم. ولی اومدم و هر سال یه جا بودم، یه سال لندن، یه سال دبی، یه سال استانبول، یه سال راشن، این ور اون ور و این آوارگی منو اذیت کرد ولی آرومم کرد. میدونی مثل یک اسبی بودم میدویدم یهو اینجوری سلو شدم. ولی بیشتر این ایده‌ها و ایده‌هام همش تو در من جمع شد و یاد گرفتم مثلا کتاب بنویسم. 2 تا کتاب نوشتم این مدت، یک کار کمپوزینگ کردم، چند تا آهنگ درست کردم. خیلی پرایوت، خیلی پرسونال شد کار آرتم. یعنی دیگه دوست ندارم دیده بشم. یعنی من هیچ لذتی از فیلم سازی نبردم، هیچ لذتی به یاد ندارم. رفتم مثلا 1000 فستیوال رفتی، ولی کل لحظات خوب فستیوال رو جمع کنم فکر کنم شاید 10 minutes.
واو.
مثلا فستیوال کن 7 تا پرایز گرفتم، 4-5 تا فیلم هم اونجا بود، ولی من خاطرات بد دارم. یعنی مثلا وقتی که من کامرا دور گرفتم 3 تا پرایز گرفتم تو شب 2000. وقتی که اومدم بیرون دیدم تنها کامرا دور و جایزه‌ام تو زیر کتمه، دیدم جز تماشاچی‌ها شدم. مردم جمع می‌شدن ستارا رو می‌دیدن. دیدم I am in the other side and I'm look at the other people. I went there but رقیبامو دیدم داشتم با لیموزین میومدم، با تیم میومدم، پرودوسر داشتم، ولی من تنها شدم. چرا من تنها؟ چرا الان من باید برم توی آپارتمانی که نیم ساعت دور با تاکسی باید میرفتم و یه جایی بودم بعد گفتم who am I؟ این چیه؟ چون تو برای ملت میکنی، تو برای یه تیم میکنی. خیلی اون تنهایی اذیتم که به این دلیل من دوره خلق یک فیلم رو دوست دارم، پروسه‌ای که فیلم درست میشه رو دوست دارم.
یعنی اصلا لذت نیست واسه شما که مثلا یه international jury بگه که this you did such a great work, we're going to give you this prize.
I hate that.
You can't feel good about yourself? Say
no.
I must have done something good?
شاید اگه مثلا یه ایرانی یا یه کرد یه جایی بگه شنیدم مثلا شما یه فیلم ساختینا، خیلی خوشحالم میکنه. ولی مثلا الان دوست دارم با 2 تا ایرانی بشینم توی کباب بخورم، بشینم واقعا تا اینکه بشینم با 2 تا پرودوسر بزرگ هالیوودی. اصلا دوست ندارم اون دنیا رو.
I want to ask you about making a difference though, because I know one of the things you've been doing in recent years is, you correct me if I'm wrong, you've been working in Iraq helping, teaching, and building schools, right?
Yeah, I was there. When I left Iran, the first place I went, it was Erbil.
Yes.
And one of the Barzani family said, you should come here and you should do something, but it couldn't happen what I want to do. میخواستم یک کانون پرورشی فکری کودکان و جوان بسازم. آرزو داشتم یک مگزین برای بچه ها بزنم. خیلی ترای کردم، در زدم یه باجت برای اینا پیدا کنی و نشد. کم کم فهمیدم خودم باید این کارو بکنم. من 7 تا 8 تا معلم کرد پیدا کردم از ایران، اینا رو آوردم عراق. کامرمن بودن، ساوندمن بودن، ادیتور بودن، سکریپت رایتر بودن. بردمشون تو 4 تا کمپ توی اربیل و ما تو کمپ ها بچه انتخاب کردیم. مثلا هر کمپی اگه 1000 تا بچه داشت، ما تو هر کمپ 50 تا انتخاب می‌کردیم، به اینها کلاس آموزش عکاسی اینا دادیم. رفتم توی کره 100 تا دوربین فوتوگرافی خریدم با پول خودم. این 100 تا کامera رو آوردم بین بچه‌ها تقسیم کردم و به اینا گفتم برید از خودتون فیلم بگیرید بعد از آموزششون، و اینا رفتن فیلم ساختن. یه باجت کوچیک پیدا کردم دادم به اینا، بعد فیلماشون رو آوردم. مثلا it was about like 60-70 short movie. من 10 تا رو سلکت کردم، 10 تا از خوباش به نام Life on the Border که تو برلین فیلم فستیوال بود. It was in many film festival. And the NHK show it, the NHK TV in Japan was so like popular programming in there. And I remember, and the guy, the head of the NHK said, with your program, with your documentary, we want to tell Japanese kids how we should proud of ourselves, how your kids in camp, they are doing this great movie with this kind of life, you know, stay in the camp and without anything. So اونجا این کلاس ها رو داشتیم، سرم گرم شد. توی یکی از کمپ ها پول درست کردم، میخواستم کلاس مثلا سویمینگ برای بچه ها بذارم، کلاس فوتبال بذارم، ولی دیدم تنها و خیلی سخت گذشت. ولی بچه هم عاشق من شدن، عاشقشون شدم، عمو بهمن، دایی بهمن، خاله بهمن، و من دیگه نمیتونستم اینا رو ترک کنم. و دیدم من هر فیلمی همینجوری بچه‌هام زیاد میشن. تمام بچهای فیلم هام تا به امروز همشون همچنان واقعا I feel like I'm their father. یعنی هستم. ولی این بچه‌ها دیدم شد 200 نفر. چند تاشون رو کمک کردم، رفتن فرانسه، رفتن جرمنی، like فرانکفورت، کلن، دانشگاه رفتن، الان درس سینما میخونن این بچهای کم. اون اندازه خوب بود، هپی بودم، اون اندازه خوب بود. 1-2 تا فیلم، فیچر فیلم هم اونجا پرودوس کردم از این فوندیشن، از اون فوندیشن مثلا $50,000-100,000 پیدا کردم، بچه‌ها رو پوش می‌کردم فیلم بسازن.
But here's my question for you. My question is, if going into cinema there was a dual focus for you. One was you figured out this is a way to make money. I don't have to stand in a bread line. I can help my mother. I can help my family. We made some money. That's one. The other reason was that you've talked about is making a difference. And I'm really curious about this path, what you've learned from this path about, I mean, you know, someone could make the argument, you could, yes, of course, it's valuable for Bahman Ghobadi to be in Erbil and teaching a kid football and being a father figure to that kid and helping that kid find a life and grow confidence and all kinds of ways you could have that impact. But the argument could also be made that when you make a feature film like Turtles Can Fly or even like Rhino Season, that deals with the revolution, etc., that you are educating the whole world, that you are bringing attention from the whole world to subjects that you want to. Do you meditate? Do you think about the difference that you can make on the ground versus making feature films? And how do you make that choice?
وقتی که به سینمای کرد فکر میکنی، ما 1-2 تا بهمن مثلا قبادی شاید داشته باشیم کار میکنیم توی 40-45 میلیون کرد. ما باید بیشتر فیلمساز تربیت کنیم. من الان اگه قدرت داشته باشم که بتونم فقط پرودوسری کنم و مدرسه سینما بذارم، برای هر پروژه‌ای بشم کانسلتنت، یعنی هر کی میخواد فیلم بسازه از A to Z من تیکرش کنم، سکریپت چجوری باجت درست کنه، به کی زنگ بزنیم، کجا فستیوال بفرستیم. من دوست داشتم هد این داستان باشم، مثل سپایدر، به 20 filmmakers کمک کنم، 20 کامرمن پیدا کنیم توی سینمای. حالا من بحثم کرد و ایرانی نیست، کردها بیشتر اذیت شدن، کردها بیشتر محروم بودن، بیشتر به اینا توجه نشد. Thinking about this, in 2000 the first international Kurdish language movie was A Time for Drunken Horses.
Yes.
That's terrible. ما چرا باید همش حزب داشته باشیم؟ مثلا این حزب A، حزب B، دموکرات، کماله، پارتی، اطلاع. ما الان حزب فرهنگی میخواد، کرد زبان آرت میخواد، زبان کالچر میخواد، یک تیوی ایژوکیشن تیوی میخواد. ما 50 تا چنل کردی داریم، یه دونش برای بچه ها به شکل درست طراحی نشده. ما یک مگزین خیلی خوب برای بچه ها نداریم. آرزو می بود یه مگزین درست کنیم برای 1000 تا ویلج بفرستیم. میدونم پر از فیلمسازای خوب، بچهای عارف، روشنفکر اینا پیدا میشن، چون مملکت پر از ستوری اون سرزمین کردستان، پر از قصه است.
Do you feel pressure that you have to be the guy to fix all of these things?
اربیل بودم خیلی اذیت شدم. من شبا اینجوری بودم، اینجوری چه دستی میرم، تمام بدنم میلرزید. اینجوری بودم تا الانم، تا 4 و 5 نمیتونم بخوابم. صبح بیدار میشم زنگ میزنم به احمد، به محمود، Kurdish president. He is the president, Kurd president in Iraq, Bahman Farmanara. I called him 1,000 times and he didn't answer. He was my friend and he could help now. Because he's an Iraqi president. I'm telling you, this is the first time I'm telling you this. I met this guy. I told him before, but when he became president, he forget who is this guy. He has to help the kids now. But he's in Iraq as a president. All of their thing is just be with the president of Biden, meet the Trump, but they don't think this, the gold is the kids is there. The gold is your people, not abroad. They don't think about that. من میخواستم این فشار رو به اینا بیارم. Hey, wake up. This is the time you should work for your people. و این اذیت هم میکنه.
وقتی که نمیتونی بخوابی تا ساعت 5 صبح چی داری فکر میکنی؟
صدا ضبط میکنم، مثلا کریتیو میکنم، مثلا میگم فردا یه ویدیو میدم بیرون به برهم ساله، میگم که من تو چرا این کار میکنی؟ بعد بیدار میشم میگم هی نکن شاید مثلا میگم برهم آدم خوبیه یه جاهایی، از حداقل انسانه، ولی یه جاهایی مثلا به فلان آدم میگم باید بهش بگم، ولی میگن نکنه اینا بکشن تو رو، هیچی نگو. بعد دوباره سالی میشه، دوباره یه بهمن میگه دوت، یه بهمن میگه دوت. من اینجوریم، عین قلبم میزنم، عین قلب دارم میزنم و این شور هست، ولی یه جاهایی کنترلش میکنم، میگم هی یه هدفون میذارم، میرم توی کافی شاپی و عاشق تنهایی. مثلا من یه شماره تلفن ندارم، یک تلفن ندارم، 7 ساله عاشق تنهایی هستم. با خانواده‌ام فقط با دختر عموم ارتباط دارم که بتونم با مامانم بعضی حرف بزنم. به همه گفتم stay far because من کارهای بزرگتری میخوام انجام بدم، نکردم ولی دارم.
Okay, wait. It's too much. Khalid, I want to ask you about all this. When you say you've not owned a phone for the last years, we're lucky to have even found you, by the way. You only operate by email. Why is it important to not have a phone?
بخاطر که الان خیلی حالم با کتاب خوبه، با فیلم دیدن خوبه، تنهایی توی بالکن خونم میشینم 5-6 ساعت خلوت میکنم. زندگی که قبلا نکردم و دارم اینجا زندگی میکنم. اگه چای خوردم مزهش رو نفهمیدم، الان بیشتر تو تنهایی مزه چای رو میفهمم. اگه دوستامو میدیدم رنگ لباس ها و دیزاین موهاشون رو نمیدیدم، الان سعی میکنم بیشتر با دیتیل باشم. قبلا یه چیز بزرگ میدیدم، الان بیشتر تو جزئیاتم. ببین با ایران که ارتباط برقرار میکنم بیشتر اذیت میشم. ایران مملکت زیباییه، کردستان حیفه و نمیخوام قصه بخورم. اگه 200 سال عمر کنم دوست دارم 100 سالش قصه بخورم، ولی الان که من 52 سالمه واقعا 50 سالشو من قصه خوردم. باور کن من تو لاین بزرگ شدم، توی سیاهی بزرگ شدم، سیاهی education in the family, like my father he was a policeman, education in the school, education, society, رژیم فیک، همه چیز. و تو میخوای من میتونستم یک عالم یه دراگ باشم، یه الکلی باشم که تو جامعه ما پره. یه بعضیا میتونن به هنر پناه ببرن. اگه من فیلمساز نمیشدم حتما الان یک یادم یه دراگ میکشیدم یا یه الکلی بودم، دپرس بودم، احتمالاً توی مرز قاچاق میکردم مثل این کولبرا که اذیت میشن، احتمالاً تا الان کشته شده بودم، رژیم ایران منو میکشت. من نمیدونم چیکار میکردم، ولی سینما منو نجات داد. من هیچ وقت عاشق سینما نبودم، الان یکم دوستش دارم، میگم اوکی، من اوکی هستی چون منو نذاشتی که بد بشم. و یه بار پرسی از من فیلمام اصلا دوست ندارم، وقتی که میگم فیلمتون نمایش میدن دستم میلرزه، یعنی دوست ندارم در مورد گذشته. اینقدر سختی کشیدیم براش ژیان جان. ولی الان یه فکر میکنم مثلا 10-15 سال وقت خوب دارم، میخوام 15 سالو بکنم 15 years رو بکنم 50 years. How I can make the time very slow. If I can make it by computer, slow motion and fast motion, for sure I can make the time, my life is like slow. But so I'm doing this, and after that, when I leave you now, I go to watch the movie and I lay down and I feel I'm a king. So ولی خوشحالم هستم. And in the other side دوستای خوبی دارم، مثل میخوام اسم ببرم Roger Waters. He was like my brother, and one or two writers, they're helping me. I don't have any contact, but I'm happy for that. And the people said, hey, don't be depressed. No, I'm not depressed, because من نکردم کارهایی که قبلا میبایست میکردم. قبلا خیلی حرف زدم، الان یکم کوایت هست. الان این حرفایی هم که میزنم مشخصه حرف دارم بگم، ولی گوش نیست که منو بشنوه دیگه. یعنی گوش کردی، گوش ایرانی نمیشه پیدا کرد، و وقتی هم پیدا میشه کاری نمیتونن بکنن. آدینس چیکار میتونه برای ما بکنه؟ ببین ما الان میخوام در مورد یکم پلیتیک با تو حرف بزنم. 42 سال رژیم ایران هست، ما یک عالمه چنل داریم. شوهر خاله من مبارز بود، الان توی مریوانه، هر روز سعی میکنه برام ایمیل میزنه بهمن tomorrow همه چیز تموم میشه، میام فرودگاه دنبالت. 42 years he's telling me tomorrow is done. Tomorrow is done. اینا هی تیوی نگاه میکنه و ما دراگ مثل دراگ شد برای ما تیوی و ما انرژیمون رفته. امروز به دوستم گفتم همه ما ایرانی ها من گفتم یه موبایل داریم الان، چی داریم؟ مثلا اینستاگرام داریم، فیسبوک داریم، کلاب هاوس داریم، این داریم. ما یک جیل درست کردیم، یعنی هر اپی یک میله از پنجره ما که رو به آزادی بود، ما تمام انرژیمون رو اینا رفت. تمام حرفایی که در مورد کرد من زدم، در مورد خفقان در ایران زدم، که میشنوی ولی زود فراموش میکنی. یعنی ما تأثیر نمیتونیم بذاریم ژیان جان. من و تو با اینترویو تأثیر نمیذاریم، فقط یکم آدما رو شاید هپی کنیم، یکم آدم متفاوت.
نه میتونیم. نه من اتفاقا حالا یه چیزی گفتی که I disagree with. چون که من فکر میکنم we can learn from conversations, we can learn from dialogue. همین الان من دارم یاد میگیرم از شما، که همینه که دارم میپرسم که مثلا تلفن چرا نداری؟ چون که از خودم من که خیلی چیزم OCD ام، اگر خونه نداشته باشم، تلفن نداشته باشم، میترسم where's my life, where's my structure, I need that kind of structure. و همین دارم از شما میپرسم. یه چیزی گفته بودی به من که قبلا یه دفعه حرف زدی بودیم، گفتی که I'm like a kite. And I thought that metaphor was very beautiful, and very freeing, emancipating, but very difficult for me to understand. Like, you don't have a house. You've been Bahman Ghobadi has been living most of the last 10 years in little hotel rooms and a place wherever you can find to live. I get اصلا من stress میشم که اینو بشنوم، ولی میدونم there's a reason why you do that, and that's why I'm learning from it, and maybe somebody listening would identify that and learn from it. That's why, so I do think this can be helpful. Having said that, why don't you have a house?
خونه داشتن و حال نمی کنم اصلا ژیان. من از خونه همش فکر میکنم توی قبرم، چون وقتی هم تو اگه صاحب خونه شدی مثل این که صاحب یک قبر شدی. وقتی ما میمیریم یک گریف داریم forever. من هیچ وقت دوست نداشتم و دوست ندارم خونه داشته باشم. عاشق این موو کردنم، چون اصلا انسان خصلتش اینه که موو کنه و من خوشحالم سینما به من موو یاد داد. من عین بچه دوره دارم بازی میکنم. من الان بچگی همچنان تو من هست و خوشحالم.
But what about a place that where you get your grounding. حالا نمیگم you need a mansion که مثلا you need a Los Angeles ایرونی, but a place where your things are, that your favorite book is sitting there, the picture of you and your mom is there, the bicycle that you've had for 10 years is there, and that's where you get your grounding from. Do you not miss that?
خیلی سخته. سخت جا. 2 تا چمدونم تو اربیله، 3 تا چمدونم تو اربیله، 5-6 تاش تو استانبول، توی لندن جا دارم، توی الی تو خونه 2 تا خواهرم اونجا چمدون دارم، تو نیویورک یه استوریج گرفتم که زندگی تونه و بعضی وقتا مثلا دنبال یه چیزی میگردم، مثلا زنگ میزنم به استوریج که میگم هی من یه سوتکیس هم اونجاست، میگه تو نمیتونی سوتکیس رو باز کنی. You should come and take all of your furniture. I just had one bed I made a few years ago and I told myself okay, New York is your place. و استوریج هم اونجا گذاشتم. من اینقدر کار دارم، وقتی که مثلا تلفن دارم بیشتر از گرفتاریات میگم مامانت آلزایمرش بیشتر شده، اون فامیلت کانسر گرفته، رژیم رفته، برادرتون 7 ماه زندان کرده. من از بد نیوز دورم. تلفنمو قبلا داشتم، باز میکردم، مثلا واتساپ داشتم، نوشته بود سلام فوری زنگ بزن به مامانه. ای خدا چی شده؟ مامانم هاسپیتاله. ای خدا من 2 ساعت پرواز میتونم برم مامانم ببینم و نمیتونی. و اینا اینجوری میکنه، اینجوری خفت میکنه و میگه خب پس چرا اصلا باید کنتکت داشته باشم من با ایرانی یا با خانواده؟ هیچ کمکی نمیکنه. سرزمینم مثل آفتابه، هر چقدر به آفتاب نزدیک میشم میسوزم. دوست ندارم به آفتاب نزدیک شم، ولی وقتی میشم من آرتیستم، من مسئلم مردمانه، مسئلم نیو جنریشنه. ما ایرانی ها بزرگترین بدیمون اینه که خودخواهیم. خودخواه به معنی که همه چیز رو برای خودمون میخوایم. بچم 3 تا دوچرخه داشته باشه، حاضر نیستم 2 تا دوچرخه رو به 2 تا همسایه هم بدم و اگه ندم عاقل نیستم که فکر کنم hey your neighborhood the kids he don't have a bicycle he will be angry, maybe بیاد از خونه دزدی کنه، شاید یه روز بچه تو بکشه، تو به اون بده و love پخش کن و education پخش کن. ما اینو نداریم. ما just همه چیز برای خودمون خوبه. به خاطر این یه فرهنگ تو ایران هست همه خونه هامون باید داخلش the best باشه. why؟ چرا؟ این از این میاد همه چیز باید بچه من نباید تظاهرات کنه، بذار احمد بره، بذار محمود بره. ما دنبال چنج نیستیم. ما الان چنجمون توی این موبایله، ما تو دستامون داریم، حتی مشتامون شده این انگشتامون، همش هم دستامون هم میلرزه. تمام انرژیمون اینجا خرج شده و رژیم دوست داره we are busy for nothing و ما چیز بزرگ نمیبینیم. ما متاسفانه نگاهمون کوچیک شد، یعنی هر روز نگاهمون کوچیک و کوچکتر شد. همه چیز ما توی یک مانیتور داره میگذره. ما خودمون مردم هم یکم تنبلی میکنیم، ما یکم مراقب هم دیگه نیستیم. همین که گفتم دیگر خواه نیستیم، ما خودخواهیم، برای خودمون میخوایم. این مشکل ایرانه و من به خاطر این دوست ندارم. من نمیتونم تغییر بدم، میتونم یه تأثیر بذارم در حد دستمالی که مثل یه گاربیج رو میگن ننداز، میگم آقا اگه من نندازم که دنیا خراب نمیشه، ولی همون تیکه است کمک میکنه. و من دوستم با فیلم ها این 10 سال اگه عمر داشته باشم، 15 سال، هر چقدر 3-4 تا فیلم دیگه بسازم، به عنوان یک ایرانی واقعا بتونم یک افتخار برای مردمم، برای کردها بیارم و فقط یه یادگاری به جا بذارم که نفیو من، فامیلای من یکم میگه این فامیل ما بود، چند تا فیلم داره. من فقط با این الان زندم، وگرنه هیچ چیزی منو نگه نمیداره که زنده باشم.
Wow.
Yeah.
You have a focus on age and aging. I watched a short interview that you did back in 2009 at a festival. I think it was for the Persian Cats film. And you said at that time, I'm running out of time to do all the things I want to do. And you were only 40 years old then. Are you obsessed with this idea of running out of time?
یه حقیقته که یونسکو میگه بزرگترین دشمن انسان تایم، زمانه. یعنی حتما هم میبره. میگه که نمیخوام من ضربه فنی بشم، میخوام 2 تا امتیاز بگیرم. من مثل 5 دقیقه آخر بازی فوتبال زندگیم دوست دارم تمام انرژیمو بذارم، حداقل یه گلم شده انجام بدم و بگم I did. حتی ببازم، ما میبازیم حتما، ولی دوستم یه گل بزنم. اون گله یک مموری برای من شاید درست کنه قبل از اون لحظه‌ای که داری می‌بینی، یا اون فامیلی که بعداً تو رو می‌بینن که این آدم بود گل زد. مثل اون فوتبالیست ایرانی است که یه گل زد تیمش باخت. من عین اون فوتبالیستم، می‌خوام یه برگردون بزنم، یه گل بزنم، ولی میدونم بازنده. من دنبال اون گلم.
آخه چرا میبازیم؟ Why do we have to lose?
نه من اسمش بازنده، چون همه میبازی.
You once told me that we all live two lives, one before 45 years of age when we're constructing memories, and one after 45 years of age where we're just thinking about the memories that we created. Although I would like to challenge that, because you're 52. I mean, I would hope that being 52 doesn't mean you're in the last 5 minutes of the football game. You're somewhere in the middle of the football game, aren't you?
Yeah, for me, to be honest, it's like that. من با این هپیم و من باید I should busy with something. How the footballists, they are busy with one ball. I'm busy with the one or few script.
Let me ask you about, I know I can't keep you forever, and خیلی متشکرم. You've been so generous with your time. Let me ask you about what you've been doing recently, because regardless of whether you have a phone or a house and the amount of countries that don't let you in anymore, you have continued to do such interesting work, and the company that you keep. So, first of all, Roger Waters. You've spent some time in the last 3 years traveling with Roger Waters of Pink Floyd fame. Name something that you've learned by observing and talking with Roger Waters.
نمیتونم بگم این یه جمله بهم میگه، ولی این جملهش مثلا گفتم تو چرا این کار میکنی؟ فیلم گفت بهمن یه دیوار بزرگ یه عده درست کردن، ما نمیتونیم این دیوار رو بشکنیم، ولی میتونیم اون پایین با میخ یکم سوراخ کنیم، تو یه سوراخ، من یه سوراخ، این سوراخ، نذاریم بخوابه این دیوار. این کاری که ما آرتیستا میتونیم بکنیم. خیلی جمله زیباست. یکی از بهترین جملاتی بود که من از این یاد گرفتم که ما شاید نتونیم، قطعا من نمیتونم دیوار بشکنم، ولی با یه فیلم میتونم یه یک صدا بزنم، یه صدا نویز درست کنیم و این نویز میتونه یک بمب صدا بشه و بتونه دیوار رو واقعا از بین ببره. این بهترین چیزی بود مثلا از راجر توی سفرم مثلا به عراق بهش فکر کردم.
That's a great idea that he has about a wall. He should turn that into an album sometime. Tell me about your relationship with Martin Scorsese. You two are quite close. He presented Rhino season. He is involved in a new film of yours called Two Brothers. What is this relationship like? Are you like father and son? Are you like brothers? Are you like friends? How do you describe your rabete with Martin Scorsese?
Yeah, the biggest problem, we couldn't be so close because of the language, and I'm so lazy for that, to learn English. And in 2002, I was jury in Cannes, and he was jury also. So we had 1 or 2 times dinner, and I find out he loved the Time for Drunken Horses, and he has one copy. He made one copy for his archive because he has one archive of the few movies which he loved. And then later I met him in Doha Film Festival. Later I met him in somewhere, and then when I left Iran, I remember in Doha he gave me his ID and he said, Bahman, if you coming around to US, and you should let me know. And then I emailed him, hey, I left Iran, and then I went to his house, and he told me he bought more than 300 DVDs, and he said, Bahman, when I'm going somewhere, I just with my daughter, we are giving the gift, like the cadeau, like gift to my friends who is working on cinema. He loves No One Knows About Persian Cats.
Wow.
So we became close. He gave me like one of his rooms as like office sometimes to use it, and I can't remember anyone who support me like that in Middle East. I can't remember. So we have one project which you said, Two Brother. We are working on this project right now. I want to shoot it in Las Vegas and India with him as an executive producer. So I'm doing something, but let's see what will be happen after the Kuwait, inshallah.
Bahman, one thing I neglected to ask you earlier, which I wanted to, is because you were so famously identified in that period after Drunken Horses and those films as part of the new wave of Iranian cinema. I'm sure you've heard that a million times in your life. What is your feeling about Iranian cinema these days?
راستش بخوای نمیدونم، من توش نیستم. به هر حال سینمای ما خیلی مثل مردممون عصبانی شده، یعنی ما تمام فیلم هامون همشون عصبانی هستند، داد میزنیم، کارگردانامون هم عصبانی شدیم، ما خیلی عصبانی هستیم. حالا چجوری میشه همه فیلمام یه جوره، همش داریم داد میزنیم رو سر هم دیگه، همش جیغ و فریاده. و من بیشتر اتفاقا ناراحتیم از بعضی وقتا از فیلمسازایی که وایس دارن ولی مثلا کمکی نمی کنن به وایس مردم. من فکر کنم امروز یه جنگی هست در ایران بین مردم و یه سیستم. تو باید بگی اینی یا اونی، تو نمیتونی سپای باشی sometimes برای مردم فقط به خاطر اینکه اون وسط بمونی، زندگی تو سیف کنی. اسم نمیبرم، یه فیلمساز خیلی بزرگی که مرد به من گفت که تو خیلی احمق بودی رفتی از ایران. گفتم چرا؟ گفت ایران خیلی جای خوبیه، میتونی خوب بکاری، خوبم برداشت کنی، یعنی خوبی برداری. گفتم دوست گرامی، من این کارو کردم ولی الان دیگه باید بکاریم دیگران ببرن. میدونیم ما، میگم بدیمون اینه که تا روزی که پیر میشیم 70-80 فقط میخوایم برداریم برای خودمون، نمیذاریم دیگران بردارن. این تفکر باید از رو هنر ایرانی به خصوص سینما برداشته بشه. میگم مشکلاتی هم که الان دارم این بوردر گذاشتنه. هیچ وقت زمین آرامش رو نخواهد داشت تا روزی که این فلگ و این بوردرها رو
But you know what? You are so beautifully consistent, because if I were to say there's one subtext of all the work you've done, it's about borders and how and the dangers and the difficult implications of borders that we put around people. And you're still talking about it.
Still, I'm on it because I'm on the border now. Right now, I'm on the border close to Turkey. When I'm going to Turkey, still I'm close to the border. And زندگی من اینه، یعنی منتالیتیم تو بوردره. برم ایران نرم، برم کردستان نرم، این فیلمو بسازم نسازم. یعنی بوردر این like the knife, you know, هر روز اینجا تو میزنه. و من دیگه از خودزنی خسته شدم. اصلا چرا باید به زدن فکر کنی؟ میدونی ما یه جمله که مثلا ما ایرانی هست، همیشه یکی رو میبینیم که ژیان چطور بود، میگه اینو اینش بده، ما هیچ نمیگیم اینو اینش خوبه، همیشه عیب‌جویی میکنیم تا خوبجویی. اگه بشر بتونه عیب‌جویی رو آخر بگه اول خوبجویی رو بگه، امکان نداره ما نتونیم حداقل خونمون که ایرانه رو درست بکنیم. ما خیلی عیب میکنیم.
Bahman Jan, on that note, a final question, and it was a beautiful segue to get to this final question, which is coming back to the idea of khune, of home and identity. If we were to remove because I feel like this conversation with you has, so much of it has been about the way you struggle with wanting to just be free to be Bahman Ghobadi. Whether it's censorship or whether it's being disallowed from being in certain countries, or whether it's the kind of restrictions of being chained to a telephone where people want to expect to be able to get in touch with you. These are all things you want to be free of. If we were to remove censorship, if we were to remove the restrictions of where you could travel, Iran, Iraq, anywhere, where would you, and you had your choice, where would you be right now? If you could be anywhere in the world. راستش بگم.
من ایران رو دوست ندارم دیگه برگردم، حتی برادرم پرزیدنت بشه، ولی دوست دارم بیرون برای ایرانیا کمک باشم، از بیرون یه چیزی یاد بگیرم. من ایران باشم هیچ کمکی نمی کنم، اونجا پر آدمای خوب کمک بکنن. ما باید بیرون باشیم. میدونی من یه پنجره بیرون میخوام باشم که بتونم بگم hey look at ایران. من میخوام یک ویندو باشم. من همیشه میگم من نمیخوام بگی filmmaker, I'm a window maker. یه ویندو درست کنم و باز کنم و به شما بگم hey بیایید این دیوار رو من شکوندم، یه ویندو درست کردم، از ویندوی من ایران رو درست کنیم. کار ما اینه. من چرا باید برم از داخل خونم یه پنجره دیگه درست کنم؟ من ویندو رو باید بیرون درست کنم و بذارم اون سرزمینم دیده بشه. دوست ندارم برگردم. و ببین مثلا میگم ایران شاید در سال یه هفته خوب باشه، ترکیه یه هفته خوب باشه، گریز یه هفته خوب باشه، هیچ چیزی الان آرامش به من نمیده. شاید عوض شدم، یه چیزی در من اتفاق افتاده. You know, I don't know where is my home. بیکاز الان خونم وجودمه. اینقدر خوشحالم با زندگی، اینقدر توی کافی شاپ میرم میشینم یک گروپ کریتیو میکنم، اینقدر خوشحالم که مطمئنم تو سرزمینم اینقدر خوشحال نیستم. تازه یاد گرفتم با ذهنم باید بیشتر کار کنم، مدیتیشن کنم، آرومتر باشم. لایبرری ذهنم پر از آشغاله، پر از مموری های بده، همه رو بردم تو کتابام. الان تازه خونه تکونی کردم، تمیز شده، یکم فایل هست، تازه دوباره میخوام چیزای جدید بذارم توش. تمام اینو اسم میکنم. This is not شعار، this is not یه جمله، این I feel it. I feel it 100%. و به خاطر این نمیفهمم برگشتن به ایران یا ترکیه خونمه، ایران خونمه، کردستان خونمه و نمیدونم، چون خیلی تنهایی. ما با یک ویروس فهمیدیم خیلی تنهایی. پس خونه نداری تو دیگه، تو تنهایی. کره زمین رو باید سیو کنی. چرا باید برم حیات خونم رو سیو کنم؟ چرا باید برم خونم رو مراقب باشم؟ اینقدر باید whole area رو باید مراقب باشیم. همین، خیلی حرف زدم.
I could listen. I could do this for hours.
عزیزم
خیلی متشکرم.
مرسی جیان جان. من عزیزم مرسی از تو.
Thank you.
بهترینا برات.
خداحافظ. مرسی
برادرم. خداحافظ.
Bahman Ghobadi, a celebrated Iranian Kurdish film director, producer, writer. He will soon release his first English language feature film. Bahman Ghobadi joined us from Greece today. You are listening to a special themed edition of Roqe, as we are doing all this month, these themed episodes. This one, the directors. Well, we've heard from the Bahmans. Yes. Let's go to Babak. Our third guest is an award-winning Iranian-Canadian film director, screenwriter, and producer. Babak Payami was born in Tehran, grew up in Iran and Afghanistan before leaving for Europe and subsequently Canada in the late 1980s to attend university in cinema studies. He then returned to Iran in 1998 and wrote, produced, and directed a troika of films that would gain huge acclaim. One More Day in 1999, Secret Ballot in 2001, and Silence Between Two Thoughts. That film would go on to be confiscated by the Iranian government and force Babak into exile in the summer of 2003. Since his exile, Babak has been involved in all manner of creative pursuits, including co-writing and directing the animated feature film Iqbal, A Tale of a Fearless Child in 2015, and co-producing and directing Manhattan Undying, a romantic drama about a vampire, which was released by Paramount Pictures in 2017. He's also been a compelling blogger and opinion writer, often discussing the Iranian community and our journey as a people. Babak has received the Best Artistic Contribution at the Tokyo Film Festival, Special Jury Award at the Torino Film Festival, and the Ferpreschi Prize at the London Film Festival, and of course, Best Director at the Venice International Film Festival for Secret Ballot. And right now, Babak Payami joins me in the Roqe studio in Toronto. Hello, sir.
A wonderful good afternoon to you and your audience. I'm really happy and to be in this program and to be with you and participate in
Thank you, Babak.
a wonderful idea that you've got going.
Thank you so much. Let me get into some of your story. Mm-hmm. You were born, like me, a little bit before the revolution. How would you characterize growing up in Iran, and why did you end up leaving the first time as a young man?
Well, I left Iran 3 times, actually. One was when I was, 6, 7 years old, and it was because of my father's work in the Iranian oil company.
And that was Afghanistan.
That was Afghanistan. Iran basically controlled civil aviation in Afghanistan, and my father worked for the Iranian oil company and that. The second time I left Iran was shortly after the revolution. And the third time I left Iran was after Silence Between Two Thoughts was confiscated. Yes. And every time had a different reason. The first time I had nothing to do with it. The second time I also didn't directly have anything to do with it, but I was a hot-headed young man who didn't experience the gradual lead up to the revolution. We came back to Iran in 1981 after the revolution. So for me, it was much more difficult to assimilate in that situation. And probably the family and like many others like me at that time decided that he's never going to survive here, or he's not going to better.
Were you a creative kid? Did you know that you're going to become a filmmaker when you were a teenager, say, in Iran?
I unfortunately have the most boring, typical story every filmmaker says. I was 9 years old and my father gave me a Super 8mm camera and I never looked back. Unfortunately, I don't have a more
That's not as boring as I became an engineer and then left it, but close.
No, but ever since I was 9 years old, I was just fascinated with this projection on the wall.
So why were you hot-headed?
I don't know. This is not a question that I can answer. I think I was.
In what way? In what way were you hot-headed?
Well, I think I'm fundamentally a non-conformist. I'm fundamentally, you tell me I can't do something and that's what I'm going to be doing. And I remember that my parents' criticism of me, especially my mother, was, ever since you were a toddler, you would just, rage about that. So part of it has to do with that. Part of it obviously is upbringing. I remember, my generation is borderline. I'm born in 1966. And my parents are very progressive. I must say this, that to this day, and my parents are over 80 years old, I am still, the Farsi expression is kam miaram. I'm still, when I converse and have a discussion with my parents, they're much more progressive and forward-thinking than I am.
Where
and
are
I
they?
think that's an
Are they
exception.
here or
they're in Iran right now.
So what did your progressive parents think when you said, I'm leaving, as a teenager?
At that time, which is the second time, my second...
the first time you went with the family.
The first time I was a kid.
The second time you came by yourself, didn't you?
I came by myself, but they had to do with it. I think it was as much their decision as it was my decision. I was not as self-conscious about the dangers of living in Iran at that time in 1981.
But so you're with your parents' blessing, post-revolution. Young Babak leaves to the West, to Europe, to Canada. A couple of decades pass. The extraordinary part of your journey is that your most famous work you do back in Iran. Yeah. So you decide. So what becomes the precipitant in 1998 to go back to Iran? Is that where you roll up your sleeves? You say, I have to do something about this country?
No. The rude awakening was after the fact. In fact, it had nothing to do with filmmaking. I was completely immersed in the trials and tribulations of an up-and-coming filmmaker in Canada. How do I get foot into Telefilm Canada, and who knows who to be able to do that? I was, in fact, a volunteer for TIFF since 1989 or something to that effect, maybe even 88. My going back to Iran had to do with the fact that my family did not want me to be so alienated. I had a lot of difficulty. I was politically very, very self-conscious and again, hot-headed in that aspect as well. I had a very, at least in my own view, a very clear opinion about what the situation in Iran is. And I mean, because this is Roqe, without ever having been in Iran in the 1980s, where there was this reformist movement, I found it a farce. And in fact, Necessary Illusions, the working title Necessary Illusions, and my borrowing from Professor Chomsky in my interpretation of the situation in Iran was that in Iran, under the circumstances, that authoritarian regime, with the trajectory that it has and the international dynamics, has to create the necessary illusion of reform and moderation in order to manufacture consent domestically and internationally in order to guarantee its own survival.
Okay.
My parents, coming from an old family, and by that time a lot of the grandparents and older generation were dying off and were becoming old, and my parents did not want me to be disconnected, and they insisted that I should at least maintain some connection with my country, come back and forth, come back and visit the family.
You know, when we talk about artists, and obviously my being a musician, my first familiarity is with musical artists. Musical artists famously have fertile periods, right?
Yes.
David Bowie's Berlin years, the Beatles in that middle period, or whatever. You look at it, Radiohead from 2007 to this time. So you would appear to have had a really fertile period from 1999 to 2002, where you make these 3 films.
Yes.
What happened?
I went back to Iran. One thing leads to the other, and then for the first time, within a matter of days, something happens, and I had to get on a public bus in Tehran. And I get on this public bus, and remember, it's 20 years that I haven't been there, and back then I was a kid. So, and there's this metal rod, this pole in the middle of the bus. Women go to the front of the bus, give their ticket to the driver or whoever the attendant is, and then walk to the back door. They get on the back side with this metal rod separating the men on the front side. And I got on this bus, and I'm making an observation, because in taxis and minibuses in Iran, these are the contradictions that you see. People are sitting like in close quarters, but on the bus they have to be separated like this. And in a very busy downtown Meidun Shahpur kind of ambience, crowded hot summer or late summer, and this young man and woman were outside waiting to get on, pushing and shoving also. And I understood just from their body language that they had something between them that nobody should know. And they got on the bus from opposite sides, made their way, snaked their way through the crowd, pushing and shoving, sweaty, and got to this metal pole. I was sitting near it, and they put their hands on this metal pole. The girl on this side and the man on that side. And these hands were sort of creeping closer and closer, but never touching. And they had this deep, romantic conversation without uttering a word, by just breathing and looking away. Just this nudge of a smile. And then they got out of the bus, and I missed my stop, and I lost my way until I had to come. And I observed them walking exactly the way I depicted it in One More Day. And I saw them walking away. The girl a few steps forward, uncharacteristic of males and females, and the man a few steps back. I called my dear friend Jafar Panahi, and I said, Jafar, this is my next film. I'm going to make it in Iran. And he says, what is this? And remember, for him, the Fuful as Kharij, what are you talking about?
Right. And just in case anybody doesn't know, Jafar Panahi, the great Iranian filmmaker.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So he doesn't know what quite to make of your diagram that you've drawn.
And I said, look, this film starts at 4:45 a.m. one morning at the bus stop. A man comes at the bus stop, and a woman comes into this bus stop, and they get on a bus and drive away. And every day we go forward. There are no flashbacks in this film. Every day we go forward. The next day we start a little bit earlier, and we extend a little bit further into where are these two going. And we learn that the guy is a prisoner, and the woman works in a hospital with suicide, And as I was just saying this, Jafar said, Babak, you gotta make this. This is just like the form alone is enough to, and introduced me to a gentleman and by the name of Ali Reza Shojanuri, and that's how I made that film.
I love that you saw that. I love that you saw that on the bus. So then. Now you have a pretty strong debut with that, but it's Secret Ballot that really puts you on the map internationally, and the Venice Prize and all of that. And let me ask you about Secret Ballot. This is this riveting film from 2001. By the way, in the lead up to this interview, I knew I had to watch. I have to watch Babak's films, and I started watching Secret Ballot, and I thought, I've seen this twice. I had forgotten that. I don't know if it had I was thinking of the Farsi name or something, but it is such a beautiful film.
Thank you.
And I don't know if you've kept up with that cast and stuff. They're just it's a riveting film. It's still riveting. I think the first time I saw it was probably 20 years ago. And this film looks at the struggle to bring the mechanics of voting and election to disorganized and rural parts of Iran, and specifically a young woman clad in chador roaming around these desert conditions trying to collect votes on an election day and relying on a fascist vehicle literally to spread a notion of democracy among the laity. Has the message or intent of what you wanted to do with that film changed as you look back at it 20 years later?
I'm so sorry to say no.
No.
I wish it had. I wish I was wrong, or I wish I would be proven wrong, and I wish that film would no longer be relevant. I sincerely wish that. It wasn't a political film.
The part that's making you say, I'm sorry to say, it hasn't changed. Tell us what that is.
Well, remember, before 2001 or 2000, when I endeavored to make that film, and I made that film during the US elections in the November time. And so I was keeping up with that, and the US elections has a little bit to do with something that I improvised and added to that film as well. Way back.
The Bush-Gore election.
Yes. Yeah. And that whole situation.
Yes.
Way back in
I like that we're still maintaining the spoiler alert.
Yes.
20 years later, we're like, but don't say what happens in the film in case somebody wants to check it out.
No, I think
you
that
can find
film,
Secret Ballad, by the way, on Amazon, and it's still it's very worth watching.
Thank you for the
what's
plug.
the Farsi name?
Raya Makhfi.
Raya Makhfi.
Remember, so way back, even before I started making films, I was very opinionated about something, and I was in a minority, in a very small minority, in fact, in my opinions and view of the situation in the 1980s into the 1990s. So essentially, I didn't buy, to put it concisely, and I don't know if this program of yours, how long it's going to go, but I didn't buy into the farce of reformism. I did not buy into that. I found that a survival mechanism kicking in. I found that to be, they had to create the necessary illusion only of reform and moderation because the foreigners would not play ball with them. They cannot continue their foreign relations and trade and all of those things.
Sure.
And I said I won't open the can of worms. In order to manufacture some abhorrent sense of consent, as they did among many Iranians who bought into that, which was the thesis behind Secret Ballot. Whether or not the process of elections is a departure point or a point of arrival within the democratic discourse. In other words, if you have a box and a piece of paper, and people come and line up and throw a piece of paper in that box, do you have democracy?
How fundamental is that to democracy? Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Or is it a passive expression of nothingness?
Yeah. The question was that just reducing democracy to elections, reducing democracy to the point of a piece of paper in a ballot box without taking a holistic view of it, in my view, is reductive. There's a very thin line between fascism and democracy. As a matter of fact, in recent history, in modern history, 20th century history, all fascistic regimes have come into power through the process of elections, have maintained power with 98%
but there's
voter turnout.
There's another side to Secret Ballot, though, isn't there? Which is that the woman, the subject, the main subject in the film, who is steadfastly, defiantly trying to get these votes, to put in her box to do her job as a what would you call him, a scrutineer or something, election. She's so determined. She so believes in it. I mean, perhaps naively. That it's quite beautiful. I mean, she wants this to work.
Yes.
She wants to count as many people as possible to get their shenasnameh, to make sure that they vote, to put their name down, because she thinks this is important. That's actually an uplifting message. If she is the Iranian people or the people of the diaspora, I would be very happy with that. Desperately trying to achieve this, even when you zoom out and look at it and it seems a little ridiculous what she's doing, right?
Thank you for not making me say it, and thank you for saying it, because that's correct. That's true. And even in The Soldier, I mean, I fundamentally take a humanistic view, not a moralistic view in terms of judging the character. The girl is naive. The girl is apparently futile what she's doing, but her steadfastness and her belief, as naive as it is.
So just wrap up the story of how you end up coming back to the West, because Secret Ballot comes out. It's a critical success. You're feted around the world. You win this Best Director prize at Venice, which is enough to make careers. You know, you set about making this film, Silence Between Two Thoughts, and you get arrested.
Yes.
So what happens there?
Having grown up in Afghanistan, I had a story in mind that I'd written during my school days in 1994, 1995. That was loosely based on Heart of Darkness, about an Afghani man, a construction worker, who is so humiliated and so wronged in Iran as a construction worker that he decides that he has to leave, and the only way that he can is to go and find bin Laden. This is a story that I'd written in 1994-95.
Wow, yeah.
To find bin Laden, kill him so that he will have a country to live in, because the Iranians, he's had enough of the belittlement that the Iranians have. Then September 11 happened. And September 11th happened on the day of the premiere of Secret Ballot at the Toronto International Film Festival.
Oh, I remember this now. I actually remember this.
There you go.
Because it was everyone was in shock.
Yeah.
There was the whole festival was placed on pause, and it was your film was.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember this.
So Venice ends in this great climax of me winning 5 different awards, and here I am, you know, having made it in the Venice Film Festival, and I land in Toronto, and I'm looking forward, all the friends and relatives, to everything. This is my hometown. TIFF is where I used to volunteer. Now my film is being shown here. Of course, the other film was shown as well, but September 11th happened. At that time, I wanted to talk about the situation in Afghanistan. I wanted to portray what I feel as someone who grew up there, bring my perspective to what Afghanistan is really like, and the complications.
Do you have an affection for Afghanistan?
Absolutely. I'm in love with that country and the people. And I've had the best experiences of my life over there. And I must say, again, going back to my loyalty to your theme, Roqe, to be frank, I am shocked, embarrassed by how Afghans are treated in Iran. I apologize to every single Afghan who has been wronged in Iran. And I have a lump in my throat just having to say this. And I wish I could go and apologize from every single Afghan person who has been wronged in Iran. And I truly feel bad about this as an Iranian. Having said that, and with September 11th happening, I felt now I'm not telling a fresh story. I'm not bringing, because remember, by 2001, I don't think anybody would even recognize the name bin Laden in the normal. And I thought I'm onto something, but it just took me a few years.
Suddenly
to be
the
able
film
to
becomes reactive. Right.
And I didn't want to do it. I sat down and I reworked the third act of that film. Right? The third act of that film begins with him arriving at a village in the mountains of which he believes bin Laden exists, that he's gotten so close to be able to go and assassinate. But in the village, they're executing people. And there's this beautiful young girl that they're executing. And he has spent the good part of the last couple of days there. And he asks around, that was in the original story, which I rewrote into Silence Between Two Thoughts. He goes and tries to do something about it. So he goes and convinces the Haji, beats him at his own game. If you execute, and someone you execute has to go to hell. And if you execute a virgin, she will go to heaven. So the Haji is embarrassed because he's gotten the upper hand, that ideological, he's beat him at his own game, and he marries the girl to the executioner. The third act of my film essentially became the opening of Silence Between Two Thoughts, and I made Silence Between Two Thoughts. And at that time, I could have, and in hindsight I don't regret it, despite everything that happened to me. To this day, if I have the chance to make films in Iran, I would not trade it with anything else. I would, in a heartbeat, I would go and make films in Iran if I could and if they would let me.
But what happened? I mean, what was the pretense for arresting you?
To be honest, I never got an explanation. Just imagine the last act of the film Goodfellas, where he's running around and looking after the helicopters and making spaghetti, and those are the circumstances I got arrested.
Was it almost like you were too successful with the previous film?
I can't say.
You really can't say? 20 years later, you can't?
I know. Look, first of all, they have to explain for what they did. I think history proves that anybody who is independent, who doesn't play ball with them, because culture for them, for the Iranian, for any authoritarian establishment, culture and art is a thorn at their side. They can manufacture anything, but you cannot manufacture an artist. And I think for them, they either have to control the arts and artists, or they can't tolerate them. And that's essentially, and I know who I am, and I'm speaking for myself, I would never have compromised. And I want to touch on the word compromise.
Oh, I'm coming to it. Okay, because I want to end off on that.
Sure, let's go.
But before I do that, and I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to belittle what you have done in the last 20 years, because you've been involved in so many different creative projects, including making some cool music videos as well. But when you talk about you would give anything to make films in Iran, the reality is, Babak, you were fertile as a filmmaker in Iran. You made those 3 films, and in the last 17 years, you've only really made one other film.
Yeah. First of all, the first 4 years after leaving Iran, under those circumstances, I was full of rage and anger. And to the question of then, in 2008, I think this question was posed to me. Why haven't you done anything? You're so energetic. You've got so much and I'm saying what was posed.
Yes.
And I said, listen, I was so affected by this situation and hurt by what happened to me in Iran that anything I would have done would have been in retaliation to what has happened to me. And I would have stood here before you and said, I wish I hadn't made those films. Because for those first 4 years, and part of my seclusion was I went inwards and I locked, because I knew anything that comes out of my mouth would be as a reaction to what had happened to me and what they had done, or what I thought they had done to me. And it took some time, but part of it also, I must confess, had to do with I was lazy. I wasn't as driven anymore to prove something. I insisted on the kinds of films. For example, over these years, I have a screenplay on the death of Caravaggio. These are all things that I'd written during these times, and I worked on a project that had to do with my grandparents' roots called, I shouldn't mention the name, that would give away too much, but it's about a Jewish boy who leaves Baku in 1918 and immigrates to Germany and becomes a prominent German author. I adapted a book by Changiz Aitmatov, The Day Lasts More Than 100 Years. And I wrote several other stories that essentially what came together was making Manhattan Undying as a way for me. In a way, I was being pushed in the direction of not going and making films in the East anymore.
But if you'll excuse me for saying it this way,
sure.
The through line is we're so familiar with the stories of people whose careers, whose creativity, whose innovation, whose energy was stunted or cut off at the knees by the revolution. And these stories are about how it continues. This wasn't the revolution. This was 20 years after the revolution. And your career, look, whether the tap was dry or whatever it was. There's no one could argue that it didn't affect you.
Of course.
And of course it is going to affect you.
Absolutely.
It's a harrowing experience. Your third film gets of this troika of films gets completely basically taken off the market.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very, very difficult situation, and this is the sort of ongoing reality of being an Iranian in the diaspora, I suppose, which leads to the other through line of this conversation, which is your commitment to not wanting to compromise.
Yeah.
You say politics is meaningless without compromise. Politics, where art is meaningless with compromise. You go on to repeat, true art allows for no compromises. I love that sentiment, and I know you believe you mean that.
Yeah.
But I want to call bullshit on it.
Okay.
Because I don't really believe that that's possible. If you're talking about making art in the corner of a room that you can look at and be happy about, that's one thing. But as soon as you take that art and bring it into the public realm, I don't know how you avoid the compromise. I'm not saying you seek the compromise, but you know this is. I mean, whether you're writing a book or you're making albums like I've made, or you're painting something and it has to go in a gallery, or you're making a film. At some point, I've got to include this scene. I've got to take this out. I've got to make sure that the lighting is like this to get to the audience. So, is it really possible to be a person of no compromise?
Not that I expected any less, but I really appreciate your astute observation. And in a way, you also walked right into it, because I have an answer for that.
I look forward to it.
I think we have to pay attention to the kind of compromise. If the compromise we're making is pandering to the Iranian regime, if the compromise we're making is for some kind of expediency because I want to trade or whatever, and say we have to pander to that system or turn a blind eye to whatever atrocity that government, I don't want to make that compromise. I will never make that compromise.
Gotcha.
But if it's compromising and saying, listen, why don't you have a piece of the pie, or why don't we have acknowledge the diversity? See, again, it's all in the kind of compromise, not in compromise itself. We cannot force it down people's throat and say compromise as a blanket statement. Why aren't you making compromises? But we say you can make this kind of a compromise that we can make as a diverse culture, as a diverse society and community, is to acknowledge that diversity, acknowledge the fact that you and I will never agree on everything, but you and I must sit and work together towards a common cause. You and I might be opposed to teeth and nails with together, but it doesn't mean that we cannot sit down and work on this program.
I'm certainly not as into Pink Floyd as you.
As I am. Yeah, that might.
I
be
like the band, but I mean,
not as into a design. But that's again, it's about the kind of compromise. And I think as long as we acknowledge diversity and and build our unity on our differences, not an insistence upon eliminating those differences. That is a different perspective, and I hope to be able to make a difference. And my rude awakening was, if you believe so strongly in that, and if you don't see that happening in your community and your society, or people hitting the nail on the head the way you see it, why don't you roll up your sleeves and try to do something about it and contribute to your community?
I mean, I feel like we're just getting started, It has been riveting, and your message has been very clear. And I so appreciate you taking the time and being our inaugural guest here in the Roqe studio, rather than on the phone or on Skype or something. Thanks so much, Babak.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and I really thank you for the time and the good work that you're doing. Had I known I was the physical guest here, I would definitely have come here with some Noon Yazdi or Gaz or something.
Just to be clear, so the audience knows, you brought nothing.
I brought nothing,
Zero.
and I'm totally.
You go to a Persian's house, you bring nothing. Now we know who the real.
I'll make up for it with Noor Khomeini next time.
Babak Payami, an award-winning director, producer, writer. He joined me here in the Roqe studio in Toronto today. And this is Full Time for Roqe for today. Hey, our website for all things Roqe, roqemedia.com, where you can check out previous episodes, video content, the Roqe funnies, and all of our guests. Go to rookmedia.com. It's also where you can become a patron of this program and help support what we do. Just press the red button that says support us on the website. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together. Producer Susan, Ponsa the artist, Thoughtful Negin, the fabulous Keon, Super Patty Saw, Sabi Roham, Aghay Merdad, sponsorship Sean, Captain Reza, and Groovy Shaya. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us and sharing our content. Please subscribe on any or all of our platforms if you've not done so already. Find me on Instagram and Facebook at Jian Ghomeshi. Mizun Bashi.